Welcome to Fragmented, a software developer podcast where we talk about building good software and becoming better developers. My name's Don Felker.
And I'm Kaushik Gopal.
Welcome to the show.
All right, so I am extremely excited today because I'm actually going to be talking about a topic that hasn't gotten as much attention other than from this developer, but this developer, for multiple reasons, is also extremely popular and someone that the Android community has loved for various reasons. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Joaquim Verges. Did I get your name right?
You did. Excellent job. Thanks for having me, Kaushik.
My pleasure, my pleasure. Welcome to the show. Now, a lot of folks already probably know you, but for the few that don't, can you maybe just do a quick intro? How did you get into Android development? And I mean, even before you've gone to some of these star companies, you in yourself had an app that you worked on that was also super popular. So can you just give us maybe a quick sort of history as to your Android career?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I could probably speak for an hour on that story because it's quite a good one. So let me know if I'm going too deep into detail, but how did I get into Android development? That story I really like because, I was a student, I think it was in 2009, maybe. Yeah, 2009, I want to say. And the iPhone was starting to get popular. It was the iPhone 3GS at the time that everybody was getting, all the cool kids were getting and stuff. And I wanted one, right? And I was a student. I just couldn't afford it. I just could not. And so I started looking at alternatives to replace my old flip phone. And I had a Samsung flip phone at the time. And so I was looking at what other Samsungs were there. And they had this new Android lineup. It was the Samsung i7500. I still remember it. And great little device, with the physical keys, the small 3-inch screen and stuff. But I quickly realized it was good, but it was a little sluggish or a little slow. And so I started Googling is there something I can do with this? And then I got introduced in the world of ROMs and modding, and the XDA forum at the time was really thriving. It was the early cyanogen mode days and all that. And I started tinkering with it really hard. And that was, I think, what hooked me. I was wow, there's actually so much you can do with this. It's infinite possibilities. And I wanted to kind of be part of that community a little bit, but I wasn't a kernel developer or anything like that. So with my kind of software education, I started tinkering with little apps, and I made little fun apps. And I think I started with a few toy apps, and then my first app that I actually published, it was a news RSS reader. And I did it, and I put it on the XDA forum as hey, here's my app, please use it. And it kind of blew up really quickly from there. And then once I had one kind of successful app, that actually got me a professional job as an Android developer back in France. And so, I kept going. I made another app, which this time was a Twitter client called Falcon. And it kind of evolved into Falcon Pro. And that actually blew up way more than anything else I've done before. And that actually landed me a job in Silicon Valley. That's how I got kind of hunted from France. And now I live in the US, and I worked for these big companies and tried to stay as engaged with the Android community as possible. And that's where I am today.
In the early days of Android, I always wanted a Twitter client, and the Twitter app was okay, but especially the early days, it wasn't, up to snuff. And I remember Falcon being one of those sort of clients that I was really interested in. And obviously that's how I started to follow you. The Twitter client just blew up. I didn't know about the RSS reader. That's interesting. But I do remember when you decided to like shutter it, or like when you were moving, to a different company, like the entire Android community was like bittersweet news.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the good news is that I worked for Twitter for a while, and I tried to spread a bit of the some of the ideas that Falcon had, and everybody who uses night mode on the official Twitter app right now, that was me. If it wasn't for me, I don't know if they're I'm sure they would have caught up eventually, but it took them a while to realize the value of having a bit of a personalization there, and yeah, it was a hard project to convince everybody to do that, because it was a lot of work, but it definitely proved successful, and that was my little touch there. Another thing is on the Android Twitter app, one of the first thing I did is the animation of images opening. That was the thing. I came in and I was like, how do you guys not have that? Come on, you're Twitter. And so hopefully, I put my hand there a little bit. And nowadays, honestly, the official Twitter app is pretty good, I'm going to say. Yeah.
That's the recent trend I've noticed too. Probably in the last few years, I've just started to use the native Twitter app. It's pretty good. I know people love to hate on Twitter, especially on the clients. But at this point, I'm finding fewer reasons to.
Exactly. Yeah. And, I still think sometimes I could rebuild a brand new Twitter client and do it all fancy with Jetpack Compose and fancy UI and all this personalization. But yeah, because of, business reasons also, Twitter doesn't love that aspect of having
competitors.
And that actually kind of limits a lot the space. So I'm not going to do it.
That makes sense. So recently, you also blog now and then, and one of your blog posts recently blew up, and it's one of those things where usually you tend to have a sense of the different technologies going around, but this is one of those times where I'd only heard about this and I had no clue if it was even real or it worked. And then I saw your blog post where you actually were demonstrating this thing. So I was mind blown. And this is about Projector is what the project is called. Can you tell us just a little about what the deal is with that? I'll also make sure to link the blog post in there, which is a fantastic blog post where you walk through it. But just for our listeners, can you talk about what Jetbrains Projector is? And maybe also go into why you even bothered to look into this, right? What even led you down that path? Was it a cool story you'd heard, or was it actually some need that you had? We'd love to hear all of that.
So that's also a good story, which is as Android developers these days, I think everybody can relate to the fact that, running Android Studio with an emulator, or even with a Chrome tab open to look at stuff, it just honestly blows up any computer. So there is a scaling thing that happens as your project grows. Your IDE will kind of use more and more resources to maintain this whole graph of symbols and classes and everything, so you can quickly jump through and all the indexes and to allow for quicker compilation. It keeps a lot of things in memories. I have a tweet out there that shows this is on my current job at Twitch, which is not even a massive app. Twitter was bigger, and just not doing anything, just after running one build and having it deployed to a computer, to a emulator or a device, I looked up my RAM consumption, and he was using something like 13 gigs of RAM. Some of it was from the Gradle daemon, some of it was from the Kotlin daemon, and then some of it from Android Studio itself. And like it was 5 gigs each for the daemons, and then 2 or 3 gigs for Android Studio. My computer only has 16 gigs of RAM. That doesn't leave any room for anything else. And so not only that, but on Macs, it's a little better because they have fans that, actually don't do too much noise and stuff, but you can still hear it, and it like heats up the sides of the trackpad really by a lot. And on my personal computer, which is a PC, I have a PC laptop, the fans are super loud, and I would literally just open Android Studio, and just while it starts indexing, my wife would complain, be like, what's this noise? And I'm like, sorry, I'm just like launching my ID, and my battery life on that PC would just melt in like 1 hour. So don't get me wrong, it works. Like you can do Android development on a laptop, like 16 gigs of RAM, fine. But as soon as your project like starts getting into the, medium size, I would say like 10 modules, 20 modules, you're going to start feeling the pain.
On the go, I have a MacBook Pro 13 that I also use. And that thing, when they say it's a laptop, if that thing gets hot, to the point where I'm like, oh, I need to like, keep it on, a desk or like a table or something. That's how hot it gets. And to your point, like even if you have just a few modules, it's crazy. Like I've worked on apps which aren't necessarily as complex. Of course, currently, like, the Instacart apps are pretty like big. So that almost it's like taken for granted. I've also put a tweet very similarly to what you were saying. And the biggest thing that kills me every time is when the indexing happens and, the amount of time it takes for like your file to basically get the syntax highlighting and the autocomplete to work. There's pain there.
And yeah, so I kind of was starting to look at alternatives, or like at least a way to have a little bit more quality of life there. And so, there's a few solutions. One is to have like the beefiest computer you can, right? Maybe I only do development on my gaming PC now, or like a desktop, like a big Mac Pro or something. And sure, then you don't have, your burning legs problem, but you sacrifice mobility. And I love like working from the couch. Sometimes I take it on the table outside. I take it to a cafe when I used to be able to. And I started thinking, well, if I still want to use this lightweight laptop, what are the solutions here? And obviously the solution is to offload the heavy lifting, the heavy processing somewhere else. And so I started looking into solutions there, and actually found this Gradle plugin at first called Miracle with a K. And it's a Gradle plugin that you set up, and basically what it does is once you have it set up, it's as soon as you hit build or any Gradle task, instead of running the Gradle daemon and all the compilation on your laptop, it pushes a command to a remote server that will do the heavy lifting for you, and then copy back the files and the results back to your computer. And so it's doing that under the hood for you, which was, I thought, pretty smart. But obviously it does require you to have another machine somewhere that will do the heavy lifting. So that can be your gaming PC at home, or a server in the cloud.
That's pretty slick. So you're saying it would Gradle compile, keep all the DEX files, probably all of that ready, and then just file transfer those files back to you?
Exactly, yeah. And it does that pretty well. Like, I think the project is like not it didn't look super well maintained, but it worked. Like I had it running and it was not bad. But so it does require to have that server, right? And so for that, I decided to go with like AWS, like a instance in the cloud, which also opened me to the world of cloud servers, which nowadays are such a commodity. Like you can get that set up in like a few clicks. It's pretty amazing. And the free tiers were enough for me to start playing with things. So I got that set up and it was working okay. But it still requires you to run Android Studio locally, obviously. It only offloads the Gradle part. So indexing and maintaining all these classes and reference in memory, all that still happens, right? And so it was better, but not the final solution. And the final solution, actually, a friend of mine that you might know from the Android community as well, called Ty Smith, enlightened me on this even better solution. Is like, have you heard of Jetbrains Projector? And I was like, I have not. Tell me more. And so the idea here is that instead of just running Gradle in the cloud, you run the whole Android Studio in the cloud and you access it via a browser. And so that, there's been like IDEs in the browser before, and I've kind of like looked at them a little bit, like Visual Studio's one with GitHub and stuff. But, for Android development, like you're doing native development, you need like ADB and all that stuff. And I didn't believe it at first. But, Ty is a pretty reputable guy. When he says something like that, I usually follow through. And so I did my research. And I found their GitHub. So this is a project by Jetbrains. So these guys, they know what they're doing, and they're pretty reputable. So that really piqued my interest. And so on their GitHub, you can find the instructions on how to set that up on the remote server. So like most of it is done on that remote server. So the process is, you start that like free AWS machine out there, you connect via SSH, and now you have like a terminal to that thing in the cloud. You install Projector, you download Android Studio there or IntelliJ. It actually works with any of the JetBrains IDEs, which is kind of amazing. I'll get to how it does that in a bit. You set it up, you run it, and it gives you a URL, like something like your IP with like a port. And on your little lightweight laptop, you open a browser, you put that URL, and boom, you have like Android Studio in your browser, in Chrome or Firefox or anything like that. And it's very crisp. It's not like a remote desktop solution where, as your internet goes down, the pixel, like everything will look pixelated and, maybe you'll have like input lag and stuff. It's not built as a remote desktop solution. It's built with a lot of assumptions under the hood because it's made by JetBrains and the IDE is also made by JetBrains. So they know how to take shortcuts there. And those shortcuts is what allows to have pixel perfect fonts, no matter your connection. Really low latency input. So typing and kind of scrolling and everything is super responsive on a normal connection. And I was kind of blown away. I was like, this is what I needed. My laptop suddenly is completely silent. It's actually too cold because all it does is just have a browser open, which, that doesn't consume that much.
Especially with those newer Mac machines we have now, right? Like the M1s and stuff. Their browser performance is supposed to be pretty good.
Absolutely. And so having confidence in that setup, I actually set it up first on I wanted to like push the concept a little bit, see how what it would allow me to do in terms of hardware. And I have a Chromebook that is probably like, the lowest end laptop I own. But I love it because it's super lightweight and it had pretty good battery life. And so I was like, will it work on a Chromebook? And I opened up the browser there, Chrome, and put the URL, and it worked. And I could do all my Android development from a Chromebook. And I did that for a few months, and I absolutely loved it. It was so liberating. Like, I can one hand holds the laptop in one hand and then type like while I'm walking and stuff. It was crazy.
As you're making your omelet on the other side,
Exactly. I even had it working on, an iPad, because why not? You can, because it's just the browser. Obviously on the iPad, things get a little weird because you don't have a trackpad, and I mean, the keyboard, you can use like the keys and stuff, but the touch controls, like to scroll and stuff, that worked fine. I even had it running on my phone to see what it would look like, and just for, because I was kind of like hyped about it. But at the end of the day, my current setup now and this is for my personal development right now, is because I knew now that I can do this, I didn't mind what laptop I would get. I decided to jump the gun and get a MacBook Air M1 for Christmas. MacBook Air is my absolute favorite laptops of all time. I used to own one back in the day, and I absolutely loved it. The form factor is perfect, size is perfect, it's light. And with the M1, honestly, the battery life is just amazing. Like, I charge it every 2 or 3 days. Because it's M1, if you're an Android developer right now and you're looking at M1, you have to know that a bunch of stuff is not going to work as you expect, or maybe slower, because, the IDE, like Android Studio, is not M1 ready yet. You would have to run it through their Rosetta layer, which honestly you can feel that it's not as fast as all the other programs that are optimized there, and so you feel like you're missing out a bit, or like it defeats the purpose.
Do you know if JetBrains released that? Because it was in beta, I thought, right? Like, they have like a beta sort of thing where the JVM runs, and it's supposed to be somewhat okay.
Yeah, so there is a issue open on the JetBrains like bug tracker for that, and it has like 250 comments or something like that. So there is a lot of interest. I actually subscribe to that, and I get email spammed so often. But I want to know when they're actually going to release something. And there are versions you can use right now, but every day I see people reporting bugs and stuff. So, it's not. You can try it. It's just not super production ready yet.
I wanted to follow up on some of the stuff that you mentioned, because it almost seems like a dream. It doesn't seem real. Your initial apprehensions, right, were like ADB, connecting a device. How does all that work? Like, because do you run an emulator again also on the machine, or do you connect it to a local device and have it again send the AAB or the APK? How does the mechanics work there? Because one difference when you're a mobile developer is you need to actually see it on a mobile to reproduce, and we can't use a browser there. So how does that work?
Yeah, and so I, again, didn't believe it at first, and turns out, so the way it works is, so the IDE part you access via a browser, right? So that's just like inputs from your mouse and your keyboard, and that gets translated to commands to the IDE, and the IDE kind of sends back like this how I should draw back to the browser, right? But then for things like ADB, or even like, well, let's talk about ADB. So for ADB, all you need, so there's two ways you could do it, right? Either you have like some sort of emulator running on your remote machine. So, and again, that remote machine can be a beefy PC or Linux box at home, right? As long as you can access it through a network. So you could run an emulator there and just have it. So now the Android Studio and the emulator kind of live in the same machine. So that works. But what you really want is like to be able to deploy to a device that you have locally, not in the cloud. And so for that, it is actually a really simple way, because ADB is just like kind of a connection to a port that you define. And with SSH, which is what you use to actually connect to the remote machine, you can set up a tunnel that tunnels everything that goes through a specified port remotely to the same port locally, as if the two ports were actually the same or connected. And so that's just one line in the terminal to set that up. Or if you look up my setup instructions on my GitHub, I show you how to set that up like automatically, so that you have it kind of by default when you start your whole environment and you start Projector. And so with that, as soon as you connect the device locally, ADB locally detects it and forwards it up to the same port on the server. And so it immediately appears on the Android Studio like device connected, and you press play, and what it does is gonna build on the remote machine, generate the APK, push it via the remote ADB, which tunnels through your local ADB. So basically it like downloads the APK basically, and then pushes to your device locally, and it just works.
That is crazy. I mean, it makes sense. Theoretically, what you're saying absolutely makes sense, because, that's how networking and like port forwarding works. But for some reason, it just seems like a dream, right? Where you're like, I mean, for all practical purposes, it sounds like you're connecting your device to that remote machine directly, right?
Absolutely. It was mind blowing to me. And you can even push this even further. And, nowadays with the latest Android versions, you can do Wi-Fi ADB really easily. And so that's my setup right now. Is I have like this little script that starts, my remote machine, starts Projector in it with the port forwarding. And then I just kind of set up my Wi-Fi ADB for my device to my local computer, and boom, it appears in my browser's IDE. And so I press play, and the APK literally travels from realm to cloud to local to local Wi-Fi. It's insane. But I've been using this for months now, and I couldn't be happier, honestly. It's really changed my quality of life of Android development.
That's crazy. I mean, I have like so many follow-up questions, so I'm going to like just keep throwing them at you, but I don't even know where to start. How does debugging work? Does debugging also work? Like, because that's an important part of like how people do mobile development, right? You put a debug point there and then you run it. Does all of that just work?
So it works. Like I have debug like step by step with it. Same way. So basically it's, ADB forwarding there. But I have had people tell me that sometimes the debugger like just kind of drops and stuff. So it does happen. Like it's not perfect for step-by-step debugging. But honestly, I've had similar issues with local step-by-step debugging. So I don't know where the problem exactly is, but definitely adding another layer to the already fragile debugging process is probably not the best. But you get logcat perfectly fine. That's still there and like not a problem at all. And I don't know, for like quick iteration and stuff, if your app is not a giant thing, you're now building on a machine that you can scale up infinitely. So you can have a machine with like 64 gigs of RAM and 8 cores and everything you want, which actually the speed of like redeploying there, you do a change, you test it, you do a change, you test it, is actually improved drastically if you scale your machine up.
So that was my question. Do you actually see a difference? Is it something that actually scales? If I keep throwing more, CPU or like resources at it, do you see a material difference?
So for large projects, yes, because you can now set up your daemon, your graduate daemon to have 16 workers instead of 8 or something like that. And so all your modules now are compiling in parallel, like twice as many in parallel. But Ty Smith, which is the person who recommended me to look into this, is actually investigating this for Uber. Because at Uber, they have a giant app and they've had a lot of issues with Gradle, and they can't use Android Studio because the indexing just like takes forever. And so he told me that the experiment they have running right now is having Projector on like one of these 96 core and 512 gigabytes of RAM or more, something like that. And that significantly improves the developer productivity. So they're seriously considering it. But yeah, Projector is still kind of early on. And honestly, this is also why I want people to hear about it, because the more attention this project will get, the more JetBrains will put resources into it. Right now, I feel like it's one or maybe two people kind of pushing for it as more of a passion project type thing. And kind of their execs are probably waiting to see the demand there. But in my opinion, like there's so many advantages to run your kind of whole development environment in the cloud. Think about this. I have right now on my remote server, I have my perfect like Git setup. I have all my like terminal preferences and stuff set up there. I have my Android Studio with all my projects, etc. That means that tomorrow my laptop dies or something, or I want to change laptops, or I want to, code from a friend's house or something like that. All I need to do is open a browser and everything is there.
It's funny. I don't know if you've seen those Chromebook ads, how they're like, oh, no problem. Your machine goes into like, a shredder or, it falls. Your photos and all your data is just, you can pick up another Chromebook and go. So it almost seems like that promise, that's something that developers obviously never could fathom. But it sounds like, hey, we're starting to get there with this project.
Yeah.
I wanted to touch base again, though, because I looked at it initially and I was like you said, it almost seems like a skunk work project, right? Like the documentation obviously is not as fleshed out because JetBrains, as like, they do a really fine job, right? Like they are solid about like releasing projects and stuff. So that's why it's interesting, because after you said like, okay, this seems to be like something that is still like very early on, it makes sense because like the documentation is not there. So I don't want to let listeners know that, don't expect it to be like a fully flushed sort of project yet. But it's nice to know that people like you and Ty have, experimented with it, especially, because it seems to be like a pain point specifically for Android developers. And one advantage we have, in the community is there's a lot of us, right? There's a lot of Android developers. There's so many technologies that we can point to, like, RxJava, Kotlin, which for all practical purposes took off just because the Android community specifically were interested, right? And it's starting to sound like this is a trend now where everyone's complaining about Android Studio, not because like it's a beautiful tool and like, and we have it so much better compared to like most other folks, in the mobile side, but even so, it can be better, like you said. And this thing that you're talking about, like, with Projector, it sounds almost like a dream, right? It sounds like one of those things that, I don't know if in the early days, if you remember, like Sun, the company used to talk about having like, what was it? Nexus machines or something, I forget, where they used to have terminals and they're like, everything's a terminal, run everything on our Sun servers, and you just have like a window into the ginormous servers. So it seems like that age is coming back again.
Yeah, I remember the Sun project is like you had like some sort of card that you put in the terminal, and that suddenly you're logged in with all your preferences and stuff. But yeah, I love that liberation of like not having to reset up, like, you know, re-download Android Studio, re-download of all my images and build tools and stuff, and then reset up my Git terminal on every single computer. Instead, it's like somewhere out there in the cloud, and I can just access it. I really like that idea, and you can see how for companies like that would be a huge productivity gain. Like you could, you know, onboard someone in minutes instead of having them like spend a whole day setting up their environment, right?
100%. I wanted to like follow up again on some things because I do think it's very interesting. That connection, after I looked at the documentation and I talked to you offline, is when that connection in my head, it sort of clicked. JetBrains Projector, the way this works, I want to talk about the mechanism, right? And again, I suspect this is how it works, but you probably have spent more time to understand. The reason they're even able to do this, like you said, they build the IDE, and so they understand, like, you know, the things that you can do to save and make that experience more pleasant as an IDE. But how does it work? It says it's like a Swing UI like framework, right? Can you talk a little towards like how that mechanism works?
Yeah. So to put it simply, really, what they built, and I think that's why it's like so brilliant, is because it's a very simple idea. So as you said, the IDEs are built on top of Swing, which is a UI framework for desktop. And all their IDEs are basically built on top of that. So like PyCharm, IntelliJ, Android Studio, etc. And if you think about it, when you run Android Studio on like a VM in the cloud, that thing doesn't have a display, right? So what does it mean to run it there? Like Swing doesn't have any display to send its commands to. But what they did is, or when you run Projector, it actually runs this thing called Projector Server, which is something that kind of hooks into the IDE and receives this Swing's draw commands that the IDE sends. So it kind of sets itself up as the display, right? And so now you have this kind of hook into, okay, I can receive all the drawing commands that the IDE sends, but what can I do with them? Well, from there, you can translate it to any format you want. And so one of the applications, and that's only one of them, is to have a client. So this is the Projector client that receives those transformed drawing commands from the Projector server and interprets them as web drawing commands, basically. So basically it goes from like Swing commands to draw things like, you know, text and all that, to Projector server, which kind of hooks into that and then kind of dispatches it to all the clients that are interested. And then one of the clients happens to be like this web server, which takes in this command, so like draw text or something, and literally transform it into now render it to a web page from a JavaScript kind of transformer there. And that's how we can render these like pixel perfect fonts, because it's not actually like doing that remote, like it's not a pixel to pixel translation. Instead, it's like a drawing command to drawing command translation.
It's almost like how vector images work, right? Like the reason SVG vectors are like so high fidelity is not because the pixel is being sent through the wire. It's more like the instructions are being sent, and so each client understands how to draw, right?
Yep. So it's all about that protocol of instructions that they control. So on the one hand, it's very nice because they, as you said, like everything can be kind of vectorized, and then so they have the instructions on how to do anything, how to draw a window, how to draw text, how to scroll and stuff. But on the other hand, that means that obviously it only works for programs that are built with Swing.
Right. And I mean, the other connection that I kind of realized before was Kotlin was a language that was built by JetBrains, right? Like they came up with it because they found Java to be too verbose or whatever. Like I forget the story, but that's the connection that I made. And I was like, oh, because Swing is a Java GUI tool, right? So it's like a graphical user interface tool written in Java. And in the early days, you could write UI interfaces in Swing and you would use Java for that. And that's where like I was like, oh, so that's why people keep saying, oh, JetBrains is built on Kotlin. It's built on like Java. And I'm like, okay, but I don't have that connection. Now it makes perfect sense because, okay, so JetBrains for all practical purposes is like a Swing UI, right? And that's being, again, obviously I'm simplifying this to a large extent because they have native apps and I'm sure there's something else going on there. But it starts to make sense where they're like, okay, there's this Swing UI projector server that relays instructions to the client, and that client now is a browser instead of, a native.
Exactly.
tool.
Yep. And honestly, the architecture is pretty flexible. Like you can imagine like other types of clients, like an actual other lightweight desktop app or something like that, or like a mobile app or whatever, right? And all these like drawing instructions, you can basically tweak them and transform into exactly what you want. And then on the other side, on the input side, it's just the other way around. So now the browser receives like clicks and scrolls and type events. So the client receives those and then can transmit those back to the server, which has that other role, which is to input back commands to the IDE. So that Projector server basically is the driver, but also kind of the receiver of all the draw commands. And that's how they're able to run the IDE on a completely headless, server out there, but still make really good use of it.
Have you noticed things like network latency mattering? Like, if you're on a good network versus like, a flaky network, it seems so boggling to me because when you're typing, people tend to type pretty fast, right? Well, at least, people can type pretty fast. So do you find any sort of like differences there? What makes this setup even better?
So definitely you want like a stable connection, and speed actually doesn't like decent speed is more than enough because all these instructions are basically just instructions. So they're very lightweight through the network. Like you can imagine like just sending a kind of click command that's just a few bytes that has to go through. And receiving is also only a few like drawing instructions, like say, imagine like some vector formats, things that go through. So it's lightweight. It's not like you're receiving like huge bitmaps and stuff that you have to learn all the time. But if you do have an actual like blip, like really like no connectivity for a few seconds, what will happen is if it's like just a short burst, maybe you'll have a delay in like a scroll, for example. That's the most noticeable one for me is the scrolling. Like, it will kind of like scroll slowly and then kind of catch up as the network catches up. And then actually typing, I've never had like this like typing lag thing. I wonder if what they do, they have like a delay between what they actually show on screen and what they send, to kind of appear like it's responsive. But the scrolling definitely I've noticed, like if my connectivity drops, like you'll get these slows downs and speed ups. But honestly, I mean, I'm telling you, I've been using this for months and I've had no complaints.
I do want to like get into like some of the other potential disadvantages before like we get into the like interesting bits, which is like I feel like I want to try this right now, so I want to ask you about those instructions. But before we get to that, the only disadvantage I think in some ways I would think, other than the documentation, but you've done a good job of compensating there with like your blog post, is cost, I imagine, right? Because these are AWS servers, and I at least know like my company pays a lot of money for AWS. What kind of costs, like, can you give a ballpark as to like what you would think, like how much this would cost? Because am I talking thousands of dollars? Am I talking like, tens of dollars? Like what kind of like costs have you seen in your usage?
So definitely, like AWS is not cheap, especially if you want to go, fancy and have like a beefy machine. But I will say, like, there are multiple ways to like avoid the AWS costs. One of them is just to have a machine at home that you use as the server. And so, for example, if you have a gaming PC or something like that, that has like a lot of RAM and can afford to get hot, basically, you don't mind, and you can access it through your local network. That can be your remote server, and you're good there.
So I can pick any machine and set it up? Like I can pick any machine I want and then just set up Projector to work on it?
Any machine. It can be your Mac Pro at home, and you cannot open it up just for your kind of MAC address or something like that, so you can access it from remote. It can be like, I have a gaming PC that would be a really good candidate for it. So anything that runs, I mean, you don't need Linux, or like Mac is fine. I think I can run it on Windows with WSL.
Right. That's their Linux port or something that they did more recently, right?
Yeah, and yeah, but for me, let's talk about the cost of AWS, because it is so convenient, so convenient to have it out there. You can scale it up. You have like all your security rules really easy to set up. Like you can only allow a few IPs to access it. It's basically always available from anywhere in the world. And in terms of cost, so I think on my blog post, I have a little ballpark. I think I said if you use it like 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, it would come down to about, what's it? $50 a month or something like that. I have to look at my estimates again. Actually, I'll have to look it up again because I haven't looked at my AWS billing in a while. The one thing I will say is that the trick is to not let the machine run while you're not using it, because you pay per minute of usage. And so you want to shut it down when you're not using it. So that's the key. And I think if you do that, then the cost is it's pretty reasonable. But obviously, as you go up in quality of the machine and RAM and all that, the prices ramp up significantly.
And just for the listeners, from your blog post, right, and let me know if something has changed here. You said you're using an EC2 instance with 8 cores, 32 gigs of RAM, and 100 gigs of storage, 40 cents per hour. And so typically, for your personal projects, you said even if you do it about 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, that's ballparking $64.
$64. Yeah, that's right.
So that is, especially if your quality of life, again, we want to we have folks from who come from very different backgrounds and don't necessarily have the resources or even access sometimes to things like AWS. So we are definitely mindful of that. But at the same time, $60, if someone said, you pay me $60 every month and I'll make your Android Studio experience, I'll say, here's $100, make it even better.
Yeah.
Because that's how painful it can get. Yeah.
Absolutely. You have to consider also you could do all your Android development with a cheap Chromebook that costs you maybe $500.
Oh, that's fair too. So the upfront cost in investing in a expensive machine is also something to account for.
Because if you take that into account, well, maybe after years, you kind of make up for a beefy laptop instead. But again, that's up to the individual of what they think is good for them. I would suggest the great thing about the AWS is that you can start small. You can even start with the free tier. The free tier, I think, is 1 gig of RAM. It might be okay for testing, make sure that it works. You can access Android Studio and stuff. But as soon as you got a real project in there, you're gonna want a little more of RAM there. And so you're going to start paying basically. But if you scale it up as your project scales up, you can save money there. And, you know, at the end of the day, if you would rather invest in like the most expensive laptop with everything you need to kind of run normally, but still accept that, you know, it will get hot, it will suck your battery, but you have everything locally, that's absolutely fine too. This is Android is all about possibilities and what you can. Everybody has things they prefer and their own personalization, right? For me, that's a price I'm willing to pay for the convenience of development on a MacBook Air, which has a battery life of 3 days and I can carry with one hand.
It's a good way to put it. I know we're getting towards the end of the show, and I don't want to hold you on for too long because I know you got to get back to your things too. But one last thing is, so if folks want to like try this out, you know, they're like, okay, Joaquim, you sold me. I need to get started with this. Where should we start? What is a good place to like even start looking at this? Where did you start? And can you give us some tips on how, you know, we can short circuit that process so we're up and running more quickly?
So at the end of my blog post, there's actually a link to a GitHub. So it's on my GitHub. It's just one README with a bunch of instructions on how to set everything up the way I have it, at least. And it's by handheld. It's a step by step. You kind of like just copy paste things, create obviously a AWS account, or maybe you have some credits from Google Cloud, you know, and you want to use Google Cloud, that also works perfectly fine. Or you want to set it up on your old machine or desktop machine or something. So you can adapt it that way. But otherwise, yeah, all the instructions are on my GitHub. We can link it in the related links of this podcast, and you can start there.
Absolutely. Joaquim, this is amazing. You've given me a lot of homework now because I'm starting to think about this too. And, you know, there's plenty of, like, we'll try to link to all the documentation that's available. It's a little sparse, but again, like you said, I think your blog post talks about it really well. If folks really have their interest piqued, I'd like definitely look at your blog post, and I'll make sure to like also add instructions as well.
Sounds good. And hopefully, you know, with people kind of trying it out and, you know, maybe tweeting at Jetbrains or posting on they have like, you know, a bug tracker website for Projector, you know, post things there, even saying like things that are good or things that are bad. And as soon as Jetbrains sees that there's a little bit of interest in there, they will, you know, take this to the next level. And I honestly think there's something really
it's like a sleeping beast there that could just change everything, huh?
Absolutely. And, you know, for personal development, but also for companies, there are so many advantages there. Definitely take a look.
That's awesome. How about this? We should all probably tweet at Jet. Well, I shouldn't say that. I just realized that may not be the best idea, but at least we should go start their project. That's a good start. And maybe we can like, you know, tell them how much we love this after trying it out, or, you know, if there's interest.
Absolutely. One last thing I will say is, you know, at first, I think what stopped people a lot is like setting up the remote server, because for a lot of, especially us Android devs, like that's kind of a bit out of our comfort zone. Get past it. You will learn things. You will realize how useful it is for other projects of yours as well to have a machine that you can just spin up at will. And then at the very end of the GitHub instructions in the README, I have my own personal little script that I made, which is what I use every day these days. I kind of run it. It's called work.bash. I run that, and that streamlines everything for me. It starts my instance. It starts the SSH tunnel for my ADB. It starts Projector, and it even opens Chrome for me. in the right thing and without all the tabs and stuff as if it was an app, So it looks like I'm really in the normal IDE. And then also makes sure that when I quit Chrome, it shuts down my instance so I don't overpay. So highly recommend looking into that little script and making your own.
Joaquim, thank you so much for this. This is awesome. You've given a lot of food for thought. If folks wanted to reach out to you, what's a good place to do that in case they're running into something that, they have like some doubts on? Is there some place we can reach out to you?
Yeah, the best place, honestly, is Twitter. I'm the most active there. The handle is JoeNRV, so JoeNRV. So, tweet at me. Any questions you have, I'll do my best to answer them.
Absolutely. And I'll definitely make sure to throw that in the show notes as well. Thanks a lot for chatting with us, man.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you, folks, for listening. And we will catch you in the next episode. That's it for the show, folks. Fragmented is hosted by Don Felker and me, Kaushik Gopal. We edit and produce all the episodes here on Fragmented. You can find more Fragmented episodes at fragmentedpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you in the next episode.